Tonight, a quiet street should have slept, but one house refused to dim. Something was stirring there, heavier than the air and louder than the silence, as if every worry that ever paced those floors had finally been cornered. From which country are you watching this video? Subscribe to this channel if you love Islam. In that house, bills glared from the table. A medicine bottle clicked like a metronome of fear, and the calendar's red circles looked like bruises from a fight they weren't sure they could win. But tonight, they chose not to argue with their problems. They chose to stand under a bigger sky. They gathered in the living room where the carpet had memorized their footsteps and the walls had memorized their sighs, and they decided to change the language of the night. No debates, no doom scrolling, no replaying the same arguments that never solve anything. Just one sentence that has outlived empires and outshone palaces, one truth that can carry a family when their legs are shaking. They sat close enough to hear each other breathe and far enough to hear themselves think, and the oldest among them said, "If we can't move the mountain, let's invite the one who created mountains." Phones face down, lights low, hearts awake. They started soft, almost embarrassed to be so needy. But need is the most honest door a human can open. The father's mind kept running numbers that wouldn't add up, then collided with a truth larger than math. The mother, who had learned to smile for everyone else, let her shoulders drop and told Allah what she hadn't told anyone. The child listened and learned that strength isn't loud and fear isn't a verdict. The grandmother wiped the edge of her mushaf, as if polishing a mirror for the heart. Outside, the street lamp flickered. Inside, something steadier kindled a hush with weight, a stillness with purpose, as if the room itself leaned in to listen. They weren't chasing miracles. They were choosing alignment. They weren't auditioning for a blessing. They were surrendering to a promise keeper. And as the words began to repeat, the night lost its teeth. Fear didn't vanish. It just lost the right to lead. What they said with their tongues started to argue with what their anxieties had written on their hearts. And slowly, sentence by sentence, the script inside them changed. It felt like opening a window after years of stale air, like stepping from a cramped hallway into a courtyard of sky. No fireworks, no visions, no cinematic moment, just a clean, undeniable sense that they were not alone and never had been. A house that had hosted complaints became a house hosting remembrance, and in the unseen, guests who love remembrance began to gather. The family didn't count them. They just felt the heaviness thin, the impatience soften, and the night become generous. They kept going, past the point where willpower usually cracks, because the point wasn't how they felt, it was who they were facing. And as their tongues stayed busy with truth, their hearts started to catch up. Long before anyone on that street learned to speak, a promise had already been stitched through time. Remember your Lord, and your Lord remembers you. This isn't motivational wallpaper. It's a law of mercy, a cause and effect in the unseen, as real as gravity. Across the earth, angels move like gentle scouts, seeking out the places where Allah is mentioned with sincerity, where pride gets quiet and need gets honest, where a living room becomes a sanctuary by intention alone. When they find such a circle, they surround it, layer upon layer, as if building a wall of light around a flame that must not be blown out. Tranquility descends sakina, not the fragile peace that shatters when an email pings, but the durable kind that can sit with a diagnosis, walk into a debt meeting, and still trust the Lord of outcomes. Mercy stretches over a house the way dawn stretches over a city, quiet, certain, and impossible to stop. Forgiveness gets written where shame had been scribbled for years. Names are mentioned in gatherings you cannot see. and the most merciful speaks of you in company far more honored than any you will ever enter in this world. What changed in that family was not the size of their problems, but the scale they were measured on. They learned that Dhikr is not escape, it's engagement at the highest level, the heart standing in the court of the king before it stands in any human office. They learned that the sentence, La ilaha illa Allah, is not a slogan, but a verdict. Nothing else is worthy of your worship, your panic, your obedience, or your hope. And as they held to it after Isha when the house is most honest, before Fajr when prayers travel fastest, their world began to reorder itself. Conversations gentled. Screens lost their power to poison the mood. Food tasted like gratitude again. Even the floor felt different under their feet, as if certainty had weight. Angels don't need your furniture to approve of your gathering. They look for truth, for tongues softened by istighfar, for eyes that lower out of reverence, for income that respects the halal, for hearts that make room for other hearts. And when those signs appear, they draw near, because Allah's guests attend Allah's remembrance. That is the promise woven into every night. If you carve a small circle of sincerity in a world crowded with noise, the unseen will expand it. If you remember the one who never forgets, you will be remembered in ways that lift what you cannot carry alone. So as their lips kept moving and their lives kept unfolding, the family realized the miracle wasn't a sudden change in circumstances. It was a steady change in the people facing them. And that is how a simple house on a quiet street became a point on the map of mercy, a place where angels love to land, and a reminder that any home, yours included, can be surrounded when the heart chooses the truth and refuses to let it go. Among all the words the tongue can carry, there is a sentence that behaves like lightning in a stormed heart, burning away illusions and leaving the sky clear. La ilaha illa Allah. It looks small in ink, but it is vast in meaning, beginning with a holy demolition and ending with a sacred construction. La ilaha. There is no deity, no power, no claim on your fear or obedience. Not wealth or reputation, or the opinions of passing crowds. Not the glow of a screen or the shadow of a memory. Not the trembling of your own anxiety. It is a decisive tearing down of every counterfeit throne that tries to sit in the center of your life. Then comes Illa Allah, except Allah, the only, the necessary, the nearer than your jugular. The King, whose mercy outpaces your sins and whose wisdom surrounds what you cannot understand. This sentence is the axis of prophecy and the anthem of liberation, the first breath of faith and the last word of return. When it enters a room, it rearranges everything without moving the furniture. When it enters a heart, it redraws maps, resizes problems, and dethrones the tyrants you didn't know you were obeying. It does not ask your fear to leave politely. It turns the lights on so bright that fear cannot pretend to be a god anymore. It is the rope that every prophet extended to every generation, the sentence that survived deserts, palaces, invasions, fashions, and the slow erosion of time. To say it with sincerity is to declare independence from everything that wants to own you and allegiance to the one who already loves you. It holds authority in the unseen, and because it is truth, angels know its sound, and mercy recognizes its scent. Hearts that carry it are not promised easy roads, but they are promised a compass that does not lie, and a sky that does not abandon them. Notice how it works in moments you think are ordinary. You worry about a bill, and the worry tries to audition for the role of Lord, demanding your worship in sleepless hours. You return to La ilaha illa Allah, and suddenly the bill is just a sheet of paper again, and Allah remains the provider. You fear a person's opinion at work, and that fear swells until it dictates your honesty. You return to La ilaha illa Allah, and the person shrinks back to a servant like you, while Allah alone keeps the ledger of your rizq and your honor. This is not denial, it is right, sizing the world by the measure of Tawheed. The sentence opens like a doorway. You step through, and on this side of the threshold, outcomes are still unknown, but the one writing them is known. On this side of the threshold, your hands still work, plan, and study, but your neck bows only to Allah. The result is a strength that feels like softness, a courage that doesn't bark, and a patience that isn't passive but rooted. When a family chooses this sentence as their nighttime banner, they are not decorating their fear with religious words. They are declaring who reigns in their house after headlines go dark. And because creation is built to respond to truth, the unseen responds, Sakina descends. Forgiveness is written where shame once shouted, and the home becomes a small sanctuary on a noisy street. Keep listening to what the sentence does inside you. It lines your thoughts like a spine so they can stand up straight. It polishes your intentions so your deeds weigh more than they look. It trains your tongue to prefer honesty over dramatics, dua over complaint, gratitude over entitlement. And when calamity knocks, it gives you a way to answer without pretending you are not afraid. You open the door with La ilaha illa Allah, and fear must pass through Tawheed to reach you, which means it arrives smaller, truthful, and manageable. This is why that single dhikr moves the heavens, because it agrees with the deepest order of things. It is the heart's native language finally spoken aloud, and every time it is said with sincerity, the world becomes a little clearer, and the soul remembers what it always knew. Nothing else deserves your prostration, your panic, or your hope. Only Allah, meaning it, though that is a craft learned over days and nights, a training that turns repetition into realization. You begin by asking to be cleaned, because a dusty heart slips while holding precious truths. Astaghfirullah, not as a nervous tick but as a real plea, like rinsing your hands before touching something pure. If you can, make wudu. If you cannot, bring a wudu of intention. Sit where distractions are least loud, and let your body be an ally. Back straight enough to resist sleep, shoulders relaxed enough to welcome mercy, eyes lowered enough to remind the heart who is king. Now slow it down. Let each word become a place you actually stand. Try letting your breath carry the meaning on the gentle exhale. La ilaha, clearing space by naming what is not a god. On the steady inhale, illa Allah, receiving presence the way lungs receive air. Do not chase goosebumps, chase honesty. If your mind runs, do not scold it like a child in a store. Take it by the hand and bring it back. When whispers say, "This is doing nothing," smile at the lie and answer with another truth. Count if counting helps, but never let numbers outrank presence. If your tongue is quick and your heart is slow, let the tongue be the teacher and the heart the student. Students lag, and that's okay when the school is sincerity. Some nights will feel dry, keep watering. Some mornings will feel heavy, keep lifting. Over time, you'll notice small proofs. Your speech trims gossip as if it suddenly tastes bitter. Your eyes get embarrassed to trespass. Your wallet refuses what is dubious even when it costs you pride. These are not random improvements. They are the heart learning to mean what the tongue says. Make tiny anchor times that guard this training. After Fajr, when the world is made of dew and newness, sit for a few minutes, not scrolling the day open, but opening it with La ilaha illa Allah. Between tasks, let the phrase be the thread that sews your minutes together so the day doesn't unravel. Before Maghrib, gather whoever is near, even if it's just you and your tiredness, and turn fatigue into worship by leaning on this sentence. After Isha, review your day the way merchants review accounts. Where did I worship a fear? Where did I obey a desire? Where did I forget? Who owns me? Then write corrections with your dhikr. If tears come, let them be a softness, not a performance. If they do not, let your steadiness be the offering. Carry the meaning into action, because a heart that affirms oneness lives it in choices. Say no to what fractures you, even if everyone else calls it normal. Say yes to what stitches you to Allah: truthful work, lawful earnings, protected gaze, repaired harms, secret charity, quiet service at home that only the reckoner sees. When tests arrive, do not treat them as interruptions to dhikr. Treat them as arenas where dhikr proves it has sunk in. Stand at the clinic door, whisper it. Open the exam, whisper it. Enter the difficult conversation, whisper it, and watch your tone turn firm and gentle at the same time. Teach the phrase to your children not as a line to memorize, but as a way to breathe when fear gets loud. Teach it to your elders as a soft pillow for worry and a steady cane for weak days. Place it on your walls by living it, not just writing it. If you slip because you will return quickly, a fast return is a sign the lesson is working. If a day passes and you did not sit with it, don't pay that debt with despair. Repay it with today's sincerity. And keep asking Allah for a heart that tastes the sentence, because He is the one who turns hearts, and He turns them toward what they repeat with love. Over weeks, the rhythm changes. You find yourself starting tasks with Bismillah and fortifying them with La ilaha illa Allah, which means you are no longer working alone. You notice that impatience knocks and finds a gate instead of an open door. You discover that gratitude visits more often because you have made it a room in your house, not a guest sofa. And one evening without spectacle, you realize the phrase has moved from your lips into your reflexes. That is when the heart is beginning to mean it, when what you repeat in the stillness governs you in the noise, and the sentence you learned in childhood becomes the way you stand in adulthood, and your home, no matter how small, feels like a place where the oneness of Allah is not only said but lived. There comes a moment when the unseen stops feeling distant and starts feeling near, not because your eyes capture anything, but because your chest finally recognizes the weather of mercy. It is the way a room deepens into stillness, as if settling into dhikr like a chair that fits the body perfectly. It is the way a tight thought loosens without a clever argument. It is the way the tongue, once addicted to complaint, discovers how sweet gratitude tastes when it has been starved of attention. Angels do not announce themselves, but their footprints are noticeable. Tenderness where harshness used to win, patience that survives the first bad email, and a courage that does not need to roar to be real. The mother felt her shoulders lower, as if the night itself had offered to help carry them. She still had appointments, still had numbers to check and vitamins to sort, but fear no longer sat in the driver's seat. The father, who had been bargaining with spreadsheets and sleep, heard the phone ring with a small answer: no windfall, just a settlement delayed for months that finally landed, and understood that provision arrives on Allah's schedule, not panics. The child opened a textbook and discovered that study could be worship if the heart remembered who gifts understanding. Even the grandmother's dua changed shape. It grew quieter and larger at once, as if she had moved from insisting to trusting. They noticed odd mercies. A neighbor who used to ignore them now returned a smile without awkwardness. A long soured conversation thought enough for a real apology. A worry that had been rehearsed 100 times suddenly forgot its lines. They slept, not the heavy escape sleep of exhaustion, but a clean sleep that feels like being held. Nightmares that used to crash through the door paused at the threshold, as if respect had been posted there. Sujud lingered, not because they were trying to be dramatic, but because the ground, felt like the truest place to say what needed saying. They began to spend fewer words on what people did and more words on who owns every outcome. This is what it means when help closes the distance. You become different people in the same lives. The tasks remain, but they are no longer tyrants. The house remains, but its air is remeasured. Angels surround gatherings of remembrance, and while the eyes cannot count wings, the heart can count shifts. Anger interrupted before it becomes injury, backbiting choking on its first syllable, a glance lowered in time to protect dignity on both sides. When tests arrived, they were not mistaken for punishments, but recognized as invitations to lean closer. A payment came late, and instead of spiraling, they asked for baraka and watched how far a smaller amount could travel. An unexpected repair bill showed up, and rather than dissolving, they gave a small charity first, and saw the burden lift in strange ways. A discount offered without asking. A friend lending tools, a problem that turned simple after seeming complicated. They made fewer dramatic vows and more consistent choices, because the nearness of the unseen does not demand theater, only truth. Their conversations began to feature Quran naturally, not as a quotation to win an argument, but as the vocabulary of a heart that knows where rest lives. They paid attention to what drew that nearness: lawful food on the table, honest earnings even when it hurt, screens that served the soul rather than seduced it, apologies offered while the wound was still small. And they guarded against what scatters angels: mocking, arrogance, casual cruelty to those who can't answer back. Every choice felt like a gate duty: open this, close that, and the more they chose well, the more the house held its calm like a lamp that refuses to flicker. It wasn't a life free of pain. It was a life escorted through pain, the way a traveler moves with a well-lit path instead of guessing in the dark. And the sentence at the center of it all, La ilaha illallah. Allah kept performing its quiet miracles, resizing what frightened them, enlarging what softened them, and naming the throne in a way that put every other seat in the room back in its place. If you looked from the outside, you would have seen nothing new. If you listened from the inside, you would have heard the sound of a house learning how to breathe. Turning the tide did not happen by accident. It happened by a routine shaped to fit real days and anchored to real prayers, a pattern sturdy enough to carry weak moments and flexible enough to survive messy schedules. They treated time like a garden and Dhikr like water, small and regular rather than rare and flooding. After Fajr, when the world tastes new and the heart is closest to remembering what it promised before dawn, they sat for a few deliberate minutes. Phones stayed asleep while tongues woke up with Astaghfirullah to rinse the heart, and La ilaha illa Allah to crown it. They chose a number they could keep rather than a number that impressed them for a day and abandoned them for a month. Some counted on their right-hand fingers, feeling each joint witness to the words. Others let the counting fade once presence took over. During the day, they stitched Dhikr to triggers so remembrance didn't depend on memory alone. Turning a key became Bismillah, stepping outside became Hasbunallah, waiting in line became quiet, La ilaha illa Allah. Opening a laptop became a quick dua for truth and protection from vanity. The mother turned kitchen work into a litany stir. Remember, taste. Thanks so meals arrived seasoned with gratitude rather than hurry. The father made the commute a moving masjid, trading talk radio anxiety for words that purify the tongue and steady the chest. The child learned to place a tiny remembrance at the start of study sessions, discovering that attention is a kind of rizq Allah gives, not just a skill one forces. Before Maghrib, when shadows lengthen and tempers often fray, they gathered whoever was home, even if it was just two of them and the fatigue sitting between them. They read a page of Quran or a few lines if that was all they could manage, then sat with the sentence that had become their banner. No speeches, no comparisons, just a circle of intention where mistakes were admitted and hope was refueled. After Isha, they closed the day like merchants balancing books. Where did I give fear too much authority? Where did I obey a desire that doesn't deserve obedience? Where did I forget the giver while staring at the gift or the lack of it? They washed that ledger with istighfar and raised the banner again. La ilaha illallah, Allah, so sleep could become trust rather than escape. On Fridays, they extended the circle a little, shared something they had learned, sent salam to relatives, and gave a small charity even if it humbled their pride more than it thinned their wallet. When work exploded or travel interrupted, they didn't abandon the routine, they scaled it down rather than letting it die. 2 minutes in a restroom stall became a sanctuary. A walk to the meeting room became a runway for Dhikr to take off quietly. They learned that consistency beats spectacle, and that the most beloved deeds are the ones you can protect from your own excuses. They cleaned a small corner of the house and claimed it as a remembrance place, not fancy, just faithful tidy, lightly perfumed, free of the endless shouting of screens. They guarded the inputs that poison output. If a show made their tongue sharp, it left the house. If a habit made their gaze careless, they replaced it with something that returned the gaze to dignity. They treated halal income like a shield and questioned every shortcut that smelled like a hole in the armor. They apologized fast, because a house that delays "I'm sorry" also delays angels. They taught the youngest to hold the phrase like a lifeline when big feelings arrived, and they taught the oldest to rest their worry on it when energy ran thin. They prepared for heavy days by building light habits on lighter days, the way a farmer waters even when it rains. And they kept asking for a heart that enjoys what is right, because Allah is the turner of hearts, and He turns them toward what they repeat with love. Over weeks, they watched the tide turn in ways that numbers alone could not measure. Their mornings stopped starting with dread and starting with direction. Their arguments shortened not because issues disappeared, but because egos were being trained. Tasks felt lighter because meaning carried part of the weight. Even when a new trial appeared, the house did not panic. It adjusted the routine the way a sailor adjusts a sail, catching the same wind with wiser angles. They discovered that remembrance is not just what you do between problems. It is the way you walk through them. And the sentence that had become their rhythm, La ilaha illallah, kept setting the tempo of the day, steady and strong, until the heart's reflex matched the tongue's truth, and the home itself felt like a small harbor where the waves could be loud, but the anchor would not move. There are signs that do not flash or roar but still speak with authority, and if you are patient enough to notice, you realize they are the language of mercy introducing itself to your routine. At first, it is small. A sentence that used to end in sarcasm now ends in restraint. A habit that used to feel irresistible suddenly looks foolish in the light of a cleaner heart. Your appetite for gossip dries up like a puddle under noon sun, and when someone brings it to your table, it tastes like dust. You catch yourself lowering your gaze and feel an inner nod, as if the soul recognizes this as home behavior. You apologize earlier than pride wants you to, and the apology doesn't feel like losing, it feels like unlocking. The anger that once sprinted out of you now walks with a limp, stops to breathe, and lets better words go first. You notice that your dua has stopped sounding like a shopping list and started sounding like a conversation with the one who already knows what you need. When provision arrives, your first thought is gratitude rather than calculation. When it is delayed, your first move is trust rather than accusation. These are footprints, not fireworks. They do not force attention, but they reward it. A door that was welded shut by years of no begins to consider maybe, and then, on a day you didn't expect, it swings to yes, not with fanfare, but with a calm that fits the room. You find yourself drawn to halal opportunities you once overlooked, and repelled by shady shortcuts you once considered clever. Anxiety loses its microphone. It still tries to talk, but the house has a new sound system, and remembrance is holding the volume knob. You start to notice how quickly you return after a slip, and that speed becomes one of your favorite changes, because speed of return is a sign of being loved. The child's study sessions stop tasting like punishment and start tasting like purpose, especially when a small Dhikr anchors the first minute. The father's inbox still fills, but he no longer treats each email like a verdict on his worth. The mother's schedule still bristles with tasks, but she moves through them with a dignity that doesn't need applause. The grandmother's duas thin out their urgency and thicken their certainty. Even the houseplants seem to perk up, though perhaps that's just what happens when Baraka wakes up under a roof. You catch small providences that would have gone unnoticed in louder days. A neighbor who never made eye contact offers help carrying something heavy. An invoice gets corrected in your favor without you pushing. A delay places you in the right place to meet the right person at the right moment, and you cannot claim credit because you didn't choreograph any of it. You find that your tongue remembers Allah in the blank spaces of the day, between the door and the car, between the greeting and the first sentence, between the kettle's whistle and the first sip. That effortless remembering feels like breathing after a long swim. Sujud begins to lengthen, not because you decided to perform spirituality, but because the ground feels like relief, and you do not want to get up too quickly from a place that tells the truth about who you are. Your dreams quiet down. Night terrors, if they visit, do not stay for tea. Mornings greet you without the old dread pressing on your chest, and even when dread knocks later, it meets a doorman called tawakkul. You instinctively choose words that protect other people's dignity, the way you'd shield a candle from wind, and you learn that protecting someone else's honor seems to protect your own in ways you couldn't have designed. Your home's mood no longer swings with the news cycle, because the throne that governs your atmosphere isn't situated in a newsroom. This is one of the clearest signs. The center of governance moves, and your emotions stop being a parliament constantly dissolved by headlines. Halal sustenance tastes different when you trust where it came from. A simple meal feels like a feast when gratitude seasons it. You give, even if small, and witness the strange math of generosity where subtraction leads to expansion. You forgive debts of the heart-old grudges that have been charging you interest for years, and the relief feels physical. You start wanting good for people you used to compete with. You stop rehearsing imaginary arguments late at night, which frees the brain to rest, which frees the day to begin without a leftover fight. Prayer calls feel like invitations instead of interruptions, and on days when laziness ambushes you, a quiet La ilaha illa Allah escorts you to the mat before it can consolidate power. Your repentance becomes faster. Your gratitude becomes specific. Your patience becomes less theatrical and more durable. You notice the rhythm of the house change, voices soften faster. Apologies arrive sooner. Laughter returns cleaner. When a test arrives, you do not immediately translate it as punishment. You translate it as a chance to grow roots. The difference is not cosmetic. It is structural. The beam inside the heart that once bent under the smallest load now holds. And when you ask why, the answer is not mystical so much as faithful. Angels surround gatherings of remembrance. Mercy descends where Allah is honored, and tranquility becomes a resident rather than a tourist. The world outside still storms, but inside there is weatherproofing you did not buy and could not have designed. Perhaps the most astonishing sign is how you treat the times you fail. Despair used to run for the microphone and declare the show over. Now, after a stumble, you hear a calmer voice remind you that the door of return is open until a final sunset you have not yet seen. You return quickly, you repair promptly, and you do not hold auditions for hopelessness. You learn to recognize the companionship of the unseen by its fruit. Less ego, more service, less fear, more reliance, less self-performance, more sincerity. You find yourself wanting to keep the home respectable for unseen guests, and that impulse detoxes what you watch, edits what you say, and curates who and what gets a key to your hours. A home that hosts remembrance becomes a corridor angels love to walk, and you can tell they have been walking by what grows in the footprints: courage, humility, forgiveness, and that rare, steady joy that did not need a purchase to arrive. Then there is the night when the pattern of small signs swells into a clarity you cannot miss. A night that feels like a chapter title written across your sky, even if only you can read it. It did not appear on the calendar in red ink. It wasn't a holiday or a milestone. It was simply a night that arrived tired and left transformed. They gathered as usual, no grand plan, no special guest, only the same family in the same room, with the same sentence that had been quietly rebuilding their days. The air felt attentive, like a held breath waiting for a name. They began with istighfar, not rushing the rinsing, letting the heart admit what the mouth had hidden from people. Then the banner rose, La ilaha illa Allah, and they did not try to decorate it with eloquence. They let it fly unadorned and absolute. The father, who had been carrying a backpack of numbers, felt the straps loosen. He remembered every closed door, and for once, did not take it personally. He pictured his rizq traveling toward him without the map apps he kept checking, and his chest unclenched before anything in the world changed. The mother, who had learned to memorize other people's needs until she forgot her own, brought her fear into the light without shame, and discovered that fear shrinks when it stops hiding. The child, who had been wrestling with a test looming like a shadow, whispered the sentence and found the shadow learning its place under a larger Sunday. The grandmother lifted her palms with a steadiness that belongs to those who have ridden many storms and still believe the captain knows the waters. Tears came, not from drama, but from contact. There was a soft collective realization that they did not need to be impressive to be embraced. They were not auditioning for mercy. They were turning toward the one whose mercy was already en route. Then, something shifted. No vision, no spectacle, only a density in the quiet, like the room had been filled with an invisible kindness. Harsh words that had been rehearsed died on tongues before they were born. Old resentments felt like clothes that no longer fit, and it would have been silly to keep wearing them. The father apologized first. It surprised even him. It came out simple and clean. No courtroom arguments tethered to it, just the humility that says, "I was wrong." The mother forgave without a ceremony, and the forgiveness didn't feel like losing leverage. It felt like setting down a heavy bag at the end of a long road. The child, witnessing adults choose softness, felt safe in a way no lecture could have produced. The grandmother smiled in the way elders do when they see a prayer crack open and pour. The sentence kept circling the room, and with each circle it scooped up fear, pride, and the small idols that had been standing on shelves no one confessed existed. In the register of the unseen, that home was being ringed with honor, wing upon wing, like a lighthouse ringed by calm water after a storm finally yields. No one could count what surrounded them, and that was the point. The arithmetic of mercy doesn't depend on your ability to tally. What they could count were the transformations. Silence that used to feel awkward now felt sacred. Time that used to feel thin now felt wide. Even the clock seemed to tick with gentler teeth. They spoke blessings for people who weren't there. They made intentions for the next day that honored Allah more than they honored anxiety. They asked to be used, not just rescued, to be hands that carry good, not just hands that receive it. They asked to be protected from showing off, because nothing ruins a gift like wearing it as a costume. They asked that the door which had opened be guarded, and they promised to stand guard with the only real tools they had: prayer, honesty, halal effort, quick repentance, and the sentence that had become their spine. When they ended, no one wanted to leave the room quickly, not because of spectacle, but because the atmosphere felt like a garment tailored perfectly. They moved slowly into the rest of the night and discovered the house different, even though nothing had been bought or sold. The kitchen light felt warmer, the hall felt shorter, the beds felt safer. Sleep arrived like a guest who knows the way in, and the next morning revealed the proof any skeptic claims to want but rarely recognizes when it stands before them. Not lottery tickets or lightning bolts, but character that held, peace that stayed, patience that worked, and doors that began, one by one, to behave as if someone kind had placed a hand on the hinges. Calls returned. Invoices cleared. A small opportunity appeared at the exact scale they could carry, without it crushing the family that had asked for it. They didn't blast it across every conversation. They tucked it into gratitude and asked for barakah. The child received clarity on a subject that had been a blur for weeks, not because a genius switch flipped, but because anxiety had stopped hijacking attention. The mother faced a difficult appointment with a steadiness that soothed even the nurse. The father discovered the freedom of telling the truth in a meeting where he would have once performed. And throughout, the sentence kept appearing at the openings and closings of moments, like a key on a cord around the neck, always present, always fitting the lock. That is how it became obvious. Not because an angel announced it with trumpets, but because the evidence piled up like sunrise. You can deny the first line of light if you want, but by the time the room is bright, denial looks like someone insisting their eyes are closed. When they told the story later, they did not say, "We earned this." They said, "We were invited." And they understood that invitations of this kind are answered not once, but nightly, by showing up, by guarding gates, by living what the tongue repeats, and by letting the unseen keep building a fortress of mercy around a house that decided to be honest with its Lord. A house that hosts remembrance deserves to be guarded like a trust, and the first gate is the tongue. What enters or exits through it sets the weather for the entire home. They learn to speak as if angels were in the room because they are, and to treat every word as either a brick or a crack in the wall. Mockery was the first thing exiled, because it laughs at the image Allah sculpted. Sarcasm, that clever poison, lost its seat at the table. Backbiting was named for what it is, eating the flesh of a brother, and no meal tastes good with that on the menu. They built a house rule as simple as a dua. If the person is not here, speak of them as if they were, and if you cannot, keep the sentence unfinished and let silence do the healing. When anger knocked, they taught it to sit outside until wudu cooled it down, because water extinguishes more than dirt. They practiced a fast of the tongue that did not end at sunset, a refusal to let sharpness pretend to be strength, and they discovered that mercy is the strongest language in the house. The second gate was the gaze. They learned that what the eyes graze, the heart grazes after, and not all fields are safe. Lowering the gaze became a form of hospitality for the soul, protecting it from being crowded by images that never asked permission to stay. Screens were returned to their rightful size tools, not tyrants. If an app turned the home into a marketplace for envy, it was removed. If a show trained the tongue to be cruel, or the heart to normalize sin, it was canceled without a committee meeting. They put Quran in the air the way some put music, discovering that verses can become wallpaper for the heart, the kind you stop noticing until one day you realize the room's mood has changed. The third gate was the wallet. They learned that halal is not merely a label, it is armor. They accepted slower income if it meant cleaner income, because a house cannot host angels while feeding off what injures the poor or disrespects the law of the giver. They set aside a portion for charity, not only when convenient, but especially when inconvenient, because generosity unbolts doors that force cannot budge. Debts of money and of apology were paid early, for nothing haunts a house like promises postponed. The fourth gate was the doorstep. Who and what crosses it matters. They made salam the password and dignity the dress code. They welcomed relatives with patience, neighbors with warmth, and salesmen with boundaries. When the talk in the living room tried to drift into tearing others down, someone quietly steered the conversation toward dua or gratitude, and the drift lost momentum. They assumed the best without being naive, trusted Allah while locking the door, and kept hospitality large without letting chaos walk in with its shoes on. The fifth gate was the schedule. Time is a house too, and each hour has a key. They guarded the prayer times like appointments with a king, because that is exactly what they are. They learned to arrive early to Salah and leave late from sujud, not every day, but enough days to train a reflex that says, I belong here. They gave the morning to clarity by opening with Dhikr, and they refused to surrender the night to noise by closing with forgiveness. They made Friday larger than the other days, not with extravagance, but with extra salawat, extra charity, extra patience in traffic, and a heart-level awareness that weeks are measured in mercy, not just meetings. They learned what opens gates and what cracks them. Truth opens, lying cracks. Halal opens, shady shortcuts crack. Gratitude opens, chronic complaint cracks. Lowered gaze opens, reckless scrolling cracks. Quick repentance opens, stubborn pride cracks. Repairing wrongs opens, carrying grudges crack. They made a habit of repair while the wound was small, stitching relationships before they bled into bitterness. They practiced the sunnah of greeting first, the sunnah of feeding others, the sunnah of removing harm from pathways, the sunnah of visiting the sick, and discovered that a home practicing sunnah becomes a map angels recognize. When they slipped, and they did, they returned fast. A fast return is a gate swinging on oiled hinges. They refuse to let shame disguise itself as humility, because humility returns to Allah quickly while shame hides from Him, and hiding is the oldest failed strategy. They taught the children that saying, I'm sorry, is strong, that returning borrowed items is worship, that cleaning up after oneself is gratitude in action, that turning off a screen is sometimes a dua. They taught the elders that rest is not laziness when it protects worship, that asking for help is not weakness when it protects dignity, that stories of old miracles still count as bread for hungry faith. They made the Quran visible, a mushaf on the coffee table, verses on the wall, but more importantly, they made it audible and livable. The louder the world demanded outrage, the more the house answered with remembrance, and the home learned to keep a quiet center where Allah is obeyed and noise must knock. They measured success by a different ledger now. A day that ended with less backbiting was a win. A disagreement that ended without poison was a win. A salary that grew slowly but cleanly was a win. A child who loved Salah before they loved applause was a win. They witnessed how guarding gates does not make a house smaller, it makes it larger inside, like a tent that stretches when the ropes are pulled true. Visitors began to comment without naming it, saying the place felt calm or safe, words that are simply human ways of describing sakina. And the family kept to their small circle, not trusting theatrics, not auditioning for praise, content to be ordinary people in a house where extraordinary mercy liked to land. They understood that angels visit states, not just addresses, so they defended the state with vigilance and tenderness. They made a practice of blessing what they wished to multiply, voicing shukr for health while taking the medicine, for work while doing the work, for one another while still correcting one another. They trained their thoughts to give the benefit of the doubt, knowing that Sujan shrinks the heart and Hujnujan expands it. When envy tried to squat in a corner, they answered with dua for the envied, because envy starves when you feed generosity. They held family meetings that were really hearts checking their locks. Who needs forgiveness? What habit is quietly stealing barakah? Which door have we forgotten to close? Sometimes the answer was small, too much scrolling before bed. Sometimes it was brave, an income stream that needed to be let go. Either way, they did the next right thing, trusting that Allah replaces what is surrendered for His sake with something kinder, even if the kindness looks like discipline first. And when storms came, as storms always do, they discovered that a well-guarded house does not avoid rain. It avoids flooding. Water still falls, but it knows where to go, and after it passes, the earth is greener. That is the quiet triumph of gatekeeping the heart and home for Allah's remembrance. The triumph nobody applauds on a stage, but that the unseen records in light. Now it is your turn to light your house. And the good news is that the door you need is not hidden. Begin where you actually stand, not where an imaginary perfect version of you stands. Pick a time you can keep with realism and respect after Fajr when the world is honest, or after Isha when the world is quiet, and draw a small circle there. Sit with your need instead of with your news. Say Astaghfirullah until the dust lifts, then raise the banner that raises you La ilaha illa Allah slow enough that the heart can hear it. Don't audition for spiritual fireworks. Aim for truth and consistency. Let the sentence be the spine of your minutes. Tie it to the actions you already do so it rides your day, instead of waiting for a perfect day to arrive. Turning the key to your front door can be Bismillah. Waiting in traffic can be Subhanallah. Feeling a spike of fear can be Hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakil. Beginning a task can be La ilaha illa Allah, and ending it can be Alhamdulillah. Create a family rhythm that you protect from your own excuses. It can be as humble as 5 minutes before Maghrib, where whoever is home sits, forgives, remembers, and asks. Keep it small enough to survive bad days and large enough to shape good days. Make your home worthy of unseen guests. This is not about decor. It is about intention. Choose one shelf to hold the mushaf, one corner to keep tidy for dua, one rule about screens that keeps the house safe for hearts. Feed the space with halal income and the people with halal words. If a habit poisons the air, evict it. If a sin has put a deadbolt on your joy, unlock it with repentance followed by repair. If someone in the home needs a soft apology, deliver it before the next prayer. Ask Allah to make your house easy for angels to find. He loves to be asked. Design an emergency Dhikr response for the moments that usually knock you over. When panic rises, breathe a slow La ilaha illa Allah, teaching the body to stand with the heart. When anger heats, say a quiet salam on the Prophet ﷺ and fetch water for wudu. When envy bites, make dua for the person you envied until the bite becomes a balm. When shame says hide, step into sujud and tell Allah exactly what you fear He already knows, then get up and do the next obedience. Craft a weekly enlargement. Let Fridays carry extra remembrance and extra service. Donate something, even if it humbles your pride more than it shrinks your wallet. Visit someone who will never be able to repay you. Call the elder who tells long stories and listen as an act of worship. Read a page of Quran out loud so the walls learn the sound of revelation. Keep a simple gratitude log where each person names one gift from the week and everyone answers Alhamdulillah, teaching the house to count favors faster than flaws. Set guardrails for your inputs. Decide in advance what the home will not watch, not because you are joyless, but because you are a curator. Joy thrives in clean air. If a show trains cruelty, cancel it. If a playlist trains heedlessness, replace it with recitation or silence. If a chat thread makes you smaller than your best self, exit quietly and pray for better company. Welcome beauty that points to the giver, fresh air, a swept floor, shared meals, words that taste like water on a hot day. Make returning easy in your house. A prayer mat visible is an invitation. A wudu-friendly bathroom is a mercy. A culture of I forgive you without, but you always is a miracle that you can choose. Teach children to run to Allah with both the scraped knee and the A+, so they learn that success and pain are both vehicles to the same door. Teach teens to respect their own hearts, enough to guard what they watch and who they become around, and remind them that Tawbah is not a one-time ceremony, but a lifestyle. Teach elders that their dua is oxygen for the house, and that their patience is a lighthouse in family storms. Let work become worship by beginning with Bismillah, practicing honesty even when it costs, refusing shortcuts that steal barakah, and ending the day with shukr even if the day ended with effort instead of easy outcomes. Relearn rest as obedience, not indulgence, when it returns you to worship steadier. Set a small, steady charity that leaves your account whether you remember or not, teaching your wallet to trust the provider more than the paycheck. Treat your mistakes as teachers. When you fail, make wudu with intention. Pray 2 rakat of return. Repair what can be repaired, and then refuse to rent a room to despair. Despair wants a long lease. Offer it nothing but the curb. Celebrate quiet wins. A night without backbiting is a festival no one sees but the angels record. A message sent to make amends is a victory larger than likes. A temptation declined when no one is watching is a crown placed on the head of a day that looked ordinary. Measure your progress by softness, not spectacle. Ask for what matters most. Ask for a heart that delights in Allah. Ask for a tongue that prefers His remembrance. Ask for eyes that lower out of reverence and raise only for service. Ask for sustenance that keeps you light enough to prostrate and heavy enough to be safe. Ask for forgiveness as if you can see how it brightens your record. Ask for death upon La ilaha illallah, Allah, and a life that practiced it before the final test. And while you ask, accept that the answers sometimes look like opportunities to grow. Sometimes the door that opens is discipline, and discipline is a mercy wearing steel. Do not be fooled by delay. Delay is a choreography you cannot see. Keep the circle. Guard the gates. Let the sentence be the horizon of your day and the blanket of your night. One day, without spectacle, you will notice the same proof the family noticed. Conversations will end cleaner. Bills will behave with barakah beyond their numbers. Health will carry dignity, even when it carries limits. Children will trust you with their hearts. Work will become honest enough to sleep after. And you will feel the perimeter unseen, unmistakable around your home, as if a kindness with wings has decided this address is friendly ground. That is not fantasy. That is a promise older than your street and kinder than your plans. Remember Allah, and you will be remembered. Light your house with His oneness, and the night will know your name for all the right reasons. Begin tonight with what you have, where you are, and trust that small sincerity, repeated, invites 1,000 guests you cannot count but will forever thank.